The U.S. Army has pledged to buy over 1 million USA-made drones. But is this the right idea and the wrong execution? Just who is really going to benefit from all this? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so first off, remember, guys, you can become a member at Combat Vet News now, not just by going to combatvetnews.com, becoming a member, getting access to uncensored combat footage and other exclusive members-only videos. You can also do it by becoming a member in YouTube, right? That'll still get you a login for the site. Okay, so the U.S. Army has pledged to buy 1 million drones in a major acquisition ramp-up. And man, this is one of those things where it has all the makings of something I completely support, right? Because you can see the Army is planning to buy at least 1 million drones in the next 2 to 3 years and could acquire anywhere from 500,000 to millions of drones annually in the years that follow. According to U.S. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll, he said that a major ramp up in the drone acquisition program is a huge challenge because right now the U.S. military acquires only about 50,000 drones a year. For context, in Ukraine, that's something akin to maybe 1 or 2 days worth of drones in their war against Russia, which, bear in mind, guys, is smaller in scale than a conflict with, say, the People's Republic of China would be. Now, there's a lot I like about this story, right? Dan Driscoll said he's figuring out ways to clear away a lot of the bureaucratic hurdles that stop the Pentagon from making big acquisitions. And that is, well, not nothing, because we know that the acquisition process can take years. And what we've seen in Ukraine is that the battlefield changes radically, substantially, not year by year, but honestly, by like seasons, right? We're seeing more drones, right? The latest move has been this evolving drone interceptor culture where Ukraine is finding ways to use existing drones as interceptors, taking out long and medium range Russian reconnaissance drones, right? You're also seeing an emergence of the Ukrainian answer to the Shahed. So drones are getting further, faster, and expanding where they operate in more of the battlefield. You're also seeing cheaper loitering munitions now, $500 Russian, I think they're called Molina systems, that are literally held together with duct tape, but they are, again, have significantly longer ranges than previous systems. So the takeaway for the U.S. Army is that we have to find ways to get these things into soldiers' hands faster and to treat them as being less essential, right? Less of a, what Driscoll describes as more of an attritable item, closer to like ammunition or a grenade than what in the Army we call a major end item, right? Like if the Army gives you a tent, I can't just as a training event, like burn the tent down. Okay, the Army will be very mad at me. But as a training event, I can throw every grenade. And in fact, at the end of the event, if there's leftover grenades, they say, yo, go throw as many of these grenades as you can, right? Or ammo or AT-4s or whatever, right? The Army expects you, it demands, in fact, that their training allocation of ammo gets expended because, well, if soldiers shoot the weapon, presumably they're getting better at it, right? So that's the mentality the Army's trying to have around drones. Now, there's some issues, right? Because contracting law is meant to reduce fraud, which is, well, sort of at odds with rapid acquisition. And this is where sort of the problems start to emerge. You see, there's a huge problem. And that problem is that Chinese imports account for the vast majority of U.S. commercial drone sales, and more than half come from DJI, the world's largest drone manufacturer, right? Driscoll said he was confident there was enough funding for the increased drone needs. The Army has already been moving to divest from older weapon systems. Again, we talked about the fact they're cutting some combat aviation brigades, which frankly, I think is probably a positive direction, unfortunately. Now, the other issue is, again, that component parts are sourced from China. And given that China is a strategic adversary, it's really hard for the U.S. to say, oh, we're going to acquire 1 million drones, but we need to source them from China, who will almost certainly be working against the United States in any conflict, right? Even in a conflict with Iran, China would almost certainly step in to support them, much like China has stepped in to support Russia in its conflict against Ukraine, simply because China believes its own rise is largely incompatible with the existence of the West. So, what I think is another important takeaway here is that the real intent is less about, acquiring these drones for training purposes and more about building out a supply chain, right? And this is sort of the other thing. You might say, well, drones evolve so fast. You could buy 1 million drones this year, but next year they could look totally different. But the intent is not so much to say, hey, we want to buy drones that will fight and win in the future wars. What they say is we want to have the manufacturing capabilities. We want to be able to take, plastic and carbon fiber and shape it into brushless motors, sensors, cameras, and engines, right? And do it all in the United States, or at least within vetted friendly countries, however many of those we still have. And so this whole intent, I think, is actually great. This is awesome. Right? This reflects our national security priorities, moves the country towards the future, and is really looking at positioning the United States to fight and win the wars of the future, right? Because again, right now in the West, we're it, guys. China can manufacture a lot of drones. They are supplying, right? It's not like China might learn to make military drones sometime in the future. They are manufacturing all of the weapon systems that are used in Ukraine today. And if Ukraine ends up being defeated in this war, the only Western ally that can make drones independently would be cooked. Because the Europeans, guys, they're not even close. They're so far away. So everything is good, right? Wrong. You see, there's a problem that happens when you start to roll back those restrictive Pentagon policies. It turns out a lot of them aren't just feel-good bullshit. They're actually to prevent corruption. And what do we have here? Why? A little bit of corruption. Because President Trump's oldest son, Don Jr., is actually a co-owner, deeply involved with two of the drone suppliers, the drone part suppliers, Puerto Rico-based Red Cat and drone parts supplied by Unusual Machines, an Orlando, Florida-based company. Now, what's unusual is that Unusual Machines gave Donald Trump Jr. gave him 200,000 shares of its stock late last year in return for serving as an advisor. Now, you might recall from the Hunter Biden Burisma thing that it's pretty weird when the president's kid gets brought on as an advisor in vague terms and gets compensated extremely massively. Now, the shares are right now believed to be worth about 2.6 million, but if they can actually score a big, tens of millions or $20 million contract, if they can get a $20 million contract year after year, those shares probably end up being worth a lot more than that, right? Now, officials at the company said that Trump's son had not used his position as Trump's son to reach out to the Defense Department, but he has relationships with high-level figures there. All of this actually should feel pretty familiar to U.S. politics, really within U.S. politics. And even the New York Times here begrudgingly admits that this is not at all uncommon, right? You can see that two of H.W. Bush's sons, George W. and Neil M. Bush, were in the oil business when their father was vice president. You might recall old H.W. was president during the first Gulf War. Hunter Biden was a paid consultant when his father was in the vice president's office, and the son of even FDR had a financial interest in a Boston insurance firm that secured contracts from companies with ties to the government while he was working as a White House aide, right? So this sort of double dealing is pretty common. And it's pretty transparent what's going on here. Now, the problem that you run into is that you can't have it both ways. You cannot have a careful, thorough conflict of interest review. You cannot simply discard suppliers because they have conflicts of interest. And you cannot have rapid acquisitions and and still purge out corruptions, right? Because what are the things you could do for this? Well, if that firm is overcharging the government because they have the president's son on the board, a competitive bid process would mitigate that. Now, of course, competitive bid processes are expensive and lengthy because you have to lay out a list of requirements and then you have to receive bids, and the lowest per unit bidder is the one who puts it out there. So is the one who wins. And so, yeah, you could mitigate some graft by saying, hey, you got to have a competitive bid process. And sometimes a competitive bid process is like also pretty riggable, but it's at least in principle one of the mitigations. Of course, there's conflict of interest reviews and making sure that the right contracting officers don't, get steered away, making sure that anyone from the White House who might be connected to the contracts isn't involved, et cetera, et cetera. Again, it's hard to do even when all the rules are in place. But if you are clearing out the rules to achieve, again, what I think is a really important end to get more drones in the battlefield, you're going to have to basically accept that the president's kids are going to make a bunch of money. Now, this isn't me being like, oh, I've suddenly changed my stance on corruption. Corruption is good. It's not. It was bad when Joe Biden's son did it, and it's bad when John Jr. is doing it. My gripe is that, it'd be nice if this didn't happen, right? And, it would be, this isn't even on the radar in terms of like corruption, right? If we're talking about real issues, it's stuff like cryptocurrency, right? Remember, the Trump coin literally was just a wealth transfer, a rug pull from Donald Trump's supporters to himself and his kids. Same with their World Liberty Financial. It's a literal slush fund where companies and governments simply buy the World Liberty Financial token, and that just transfers money to the Trump organization. So this isn't even on the radar in terms of crooked double dealing. This is like normal politician double dealing. And again, if this is the price to get usable drones into the hands of soldiers, I'm willing to do it, right? I think it's worth it. As insane as this sounds, because let me give you a context. Because Ukraine is trying to produce literally 5 million of these drones, various sorts, long-range drones, short-range drones, FPVs, reconnaissance drones, a Mavic equivalent, relay drones. Remember, you have to understand, there are so many. There are so many of these drones, right? Fiber optic drones, the strike drones we see, right? But everybody sees the strike drones. There's also reconnaissance drones that are almost always in the air. Then you also have mid-range strike drones, like sort of gliding drones. You also have, essentially, think of them as antenna drones. These are relay drones that hold a stable position in the sky and relay signals to extend the range of drones, right? And to obscure the origin of some of these drone operators. You also have EW detection drones, right? That Russia is fielding, where they'll have these drones simply sweep along, 3 to 10 kilometers beyond the front and look for the subtle, quiet, telltale signals of a drone, a Ukrainian drone team. And then they'll download those subtle signals after the reconnaissance flight is complete and use it to try to map where they think Ukrainian drone teams might be operating. It's all this is again, we're seeing the exact progression that occurred in World War I with aircraft. You might recall that early World War I, they said, okay, aircraft, great for reconnaissance. Everybody said, yeah, they are. They take pictures or they land, and then they tell commanders about their troop movements. But then you began to see a specialty type of aircraft. You began to see specialization. Some aircraft were sent up where the pilots would have guns, and they'd say, listen, your job in your aircraft is to shoot the other guy. Don't let that aircraft spy on us. Right? And that evolved into an interceptor. Then you began to have pilots who would hold grenades over crucial targets and try to drop them. Those evolved into dedicated bomber aircraft, right? Then you began to see more and more of these sort of evolutions, right? You begin to see cargo aircraft, right? By World War II, you had aircraft that were not combat aircraft, where they would simply exist solely to move cargo from place to place. We're starting to see those things evolve too in the form of UGVs, and even some specialty drones like the Vampire. So this is the direction that the U.S. Army has to take, right? This is the equivalent of watching one military, a conflict, and you say, wow, they have fighters, they have bombers, they have dedicated interceptors, they have dedicated electronic warfare, they have dedicated counter EW, they have interceptors. And the U.S. Army goes, we don't have anything. We don't have a single fixed wing airplane. That is the equivalent of where we're operating right now. The Army says we have nothing. We have the equivalent. We don't even have the Wright brothers flyer. And meanwhile, the Russians have, again, the equivalent of like a P-51 Mustang, a B-52 or B-24, carrier aircraft, reconnaissance aircraft, like all of these specialty airframes. That's how far behind we are. So if this is what we need to do to get it happen, if we got to grease the palms of Donnie Jr., so be it. Anyway, guys, thanks to Sergei Zinchenko, Thomas Anderson, William Mack, Shanko Georgiev, AL90, and all of our Lieutenant Tier members. Hit subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Cheers.